The meeting will come to order. May we have a call to the roll, please?
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A motion, please, for the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Motion made by Jawanda, seconded by Baumgartner. All those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Opposed, no. Okay. We have two sets of minutes to approve, and I'm going to lump them. I need a motion for the minutes of the November 18 and January the 13th meetings.
I think we have public comment.
Yeah,
Number 3.
number 3, public comment.
Public comment, oh, okay. Any public comment at this time? Now I can go to the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Regular moved and seconded that the minutes of the November 18 and January 13 be approved as presented.
And the motion, the primary motion, okay. And second?
Comment, yeah.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Opposed, no. Okay. Item number 5, consent agenda.
Move to
Motion, please.
approve. Comment.
I'll second.
I didn't hear the motion or the second.
That was a motion.
Motion and second.
Okay. Roll call for the consent agenda.
Commissioner Wooten,
Aye.
Steigenmeyer, Baumgarten,
Aye.
Cochran,
Yes.
Jawanda,
Aye.
and Schwartz.
Aye.
Ayes have it, most carried. Those in favor, please vote aye. Opposed, no. Okay. Item number 6, Kells Ranch annexation. Heather Easman would like to speak.
Hello. I'm a resident of Yuba City, and I'm going to be impacted by a lot of this. I live on the corner of Lincoln and Sanborn, so there's a lot of
Want your speaker.
annexation. Sorry?
Look,
Want your speaker.
It's green.
Is it on?
Yeah? Do I need to speak into it? Is that better if I speak into it? Okay. Or maybe I can put it a little closer. It just feels a bit odd. Sorry about that. So I live on the corner of Lincoln and Sanborn, and so there's a lot of annexation and development that's occurring in that area right now. I'm not sure how this, whether or not this is going to be discussed today, but this section, as well as some of the other sections there, there's a bit of a situation. I'm not quite sure how that's going to be resolved as far as the keyhole for the rest of the Yuba City, but it's been kind of something that I've been following. It just seems like either maybe there's some background communication that's going on between the county and the city, but at least in the meetings that I've been attending, and I'm sure that Councilman Baumgarten can tell you, I do attend a lot of the meetings, and I actually see a lot online as well, including sometimes this meeting. It just seems like there's some sort of a either not a lot of communication going on between the groups, or that there's some sort of a design or maybe a priority list or something that needs to be developed so that we can get some of these things to run a little more smoothly. I actually had a plumber that came over to my house last week, and he was explaining how, because the county had these residential estates with large homes on them and had these leach lines going there, but then when they started to develop within the city has rules that you can't have a well, actually I guess it's the county too, but the wells can't be within a certain distance from the leach lines. So you couldn't put in housing on a well that was too compact. And it made a problem because they were evidently trying to fix some things, and they ended up saying that they can't do a well, or they can't do a sewer system because there were other people with wells around them. And so it just seems like there's some sort of a situation where it's within the sphere of influence of Yuba City. Then there needs to be something on the county side as well that says, okay, if you're going to start putting in a house here, we don't have sewer system, we don't have water system out there. I mean, this is just an example, right? That we're going to have to come up with something so that we know that this doesn't impact either future development per our plan, which we have in place, or that it's not going to cause a problem so that somebody can't do something because there's somebody put in a leach line that's too close. A lot of the other houses that are out there are going to have situations that they're going to have to hook up soon anyways, because a lot of the housing was built in the 60s and the 70s. And when I bought my house 5 years ago, we had a septic system, and it failed the test, and there was no way to get another one in the backyard or in the front yard, because in the front yard we didn't have enough space, and there were other people that had wells around us. So we had to hook up to city sewer. So I don't have water, I have a well, but I have city sewer, and I'm the only one in the area that has city sewer, and everybody else has city water. So it's a bit odd, and I'm in the city limits. My neighbors across the street are in the county. So it's kind of an odd constellation. We were incorporated sometime about 10, 15 years ago, and I would plead with you to really think about, when you're developing around this, to get a system in place so that you're not approving, so the county's not approving something that the city's going to have to deal with later, if that makes sense. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I don't know if we want to address some of the concerns now, but I'm sure we can talk about the water and the sewer connections, and I'm sure Mr. Moody or Mr. Libby can talk about the planning that goes on between the county and the city, and the restrictions, if they will, or the regulations. We can do it if you'd like to get with Ms. Esman afterwards too. Your pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to start on that, so absolutely this area has been discussed and planned, and there's been coordination going on for 7 years, I would say. The Bogue Sewer Master Plan, it started in 2015, maybe 2014 even, as a project. And so there's been many planning documents regarding the master plan, the infrastructure studies, and the sphere of influence boundary adjustments, on and on. And so what we're seeing today is really that progression as we move forward to systematically annex land and have it in that planned zoned area that will then develop in accordance with those plans. And so that's really the intent today, is to continue to follow that systematic approach so it's done correctly. And so regarding leach fields and water standards, that's really just a change in laws over time. At a time when development was able to occur 20, 30 years ago, there was different setbacks for leach fields, different setbacks for wells. There was allowed development in the county. And so as laws have changed, as the city's grown out along Lincoln Road and taken that in, infrastructure's grown out there, and there's that opportunity to connect where you have some people that are on city sewer versus well water or the other way around, where they're on septic, but they have water if that infrastructure is there. And that's allowed through some planning documents that we got, some policy decisions that the council has made to allow those services outside the city limits or in the city limits, but within the sphere. I'd be happy to go into detail on any of the questions.
I think the only other thing is that within the sphere of influence, there exists an agreement between the county and the city to build towards city standards, so the stuff is consistent. Is that not correct?
That is correct, and the county actually collects impact fees on behalf of the city when projects are built within the sphere, so that they're working towards that planned development.
So I think the potential for impacts of development within the city's sphere of influence, much like you mentioned, Ms. Esmond, is probably minimized by the fact that the city and the county have agreed to follow the city standards. And therefore, if someone's saying that they can't put in a well or they can't put in a septic system, there's some criteria set forth for those. I'm not aware, and Diana or Ben, you can please correct me, is the city doesn't require anybody to hook up. It's usually a function of a health department requirement based upon a failed septic system or something with a well.
Correct. There's a state building standard with the environmental health code. If it's within so many feet, 200 feet of a sewer system, then they would need to connect. But there's many options and criteria that they could work through with the environmental health department.
Through the chair.
Mendoza.
I had one more comment. Through the chair. I had one comment. For the annexation of the Keyhole area that you brought up, that was tried to approve, I think in 2017 twice the city has tried to reach out and try to get it added. It hasn't happened. The voters turned it down both times. And the city does, in most places, provide city water, even in the Keyhole. Not everyone does, but almost no one in the Keyhole has city sewer. And this is some of my concerns is in the future that those septics and leach fields will fail. And how do we redress that problem at that point? It's problematic.
Rebecca Mendoza.
There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and voice my concerns on this matter. My name is Rebecca Mendoza, and I'm the owner of the property that sits in the middle of this application proposing annexation. I grew up on this ranch, and it's been in my family since the 1860s. The house I now own on 1.47 acres was built by my grandparents in the 1950s. Although I chose not to voluntarily participate in this application, I did look over it and just want to point out that there is an error on the application that transferred over to the executive report as well. Under 9, land use, which lists there is one existing home site within the proposed annexation. In fact, there are 3 homes, and they are all currently occupied by families that will be impacted by this development. I'm aware of the Bogue Stewart Master Plan and the fact that the land is now in the City of Yuba City sphere of influence. My issue lies in the land use designations and zoning. As far as I can tell by the Bogue Stewart Master Plan maps, my land and home would be designated as light industrial. I feel that would damage my property value overall, and I don't feel that it's an appropriate or good use of my property. Less than 700 feet away along Walton Avenue and down Star Road, you'll see ranchettes, multiple ranchettes. And there are several homes along Stewart Road that are now zoned ag that as part of the Bogue Stewart Master Plan would become light industrial or open space. I feel it's more appropriate to have a buffer between light industrial and residential areas due to light, noise, odor issues, as well as the potential for possible pollution. What I was able to view of the application did not include the attachments, so I'm not sure of the developer's plans as far as specific areas of zoning, but it does look as though there are some changes just on the list of zoning. Possibly the removal of the open space next to Gil Sizer Slough, so maybe you can help me with that. So if those kind of changes are possible to make, I would urge the commission to take a closer look and recommend possibly editing the land use or zoning to include my area and the areas around it as residential going forward rather than light industrial. Thank you for your time and your careful consideration.
John? I hear some more. Go ahead.
Oh, wait for John.
I don't really have a comment on the specific city zoning. That was done in the Bogue Stewart Master Plan. And I don't know if Ben Moody has a comment on specifically the zoning to address Mrs.
Yeah, I mean.
Mendoza's.
The item before you tonight, this afternoon, is regarding annexation. The zoning has been set. They're through the process with the development of the Bogue Stewart Master Plan, the EIR, all of the traffic studies. They've analyzed and looked at the zoning and established that infrastructure need based on that zoning. And so it is set. Tonight, this would annex into that zoning, and there's always a future option to then go through the city processes to rezone it. But the zoning is set at this time, and there's been plenty of public meetings over the years to work through establishing that pre-annexation zoning. Light industrial, there are options in the light industrial, and there's no immediate requirement for change. The non-conforming use, existing residents are allowed to be in that zoning. It's just when it develops, then it will develop at a city standard, and there will be city policies implemented, that design standards that make sure we address and have those buffers. If there's a residential house, there needs to be typically sound walls, or there needs to be certain setbacks established to help identify some of that area. Along that corridor, it's low. It's close to the city. My understanding is why it was light industrial designated for that area is because it's getting close to the floodplain. It's along 99. There's access off of Stewart back in there. There's a bus shed. Sean might have a little bit more info as far as some of the existing agricultural uses in there is why I believe that zoning came to be.
Hello, my name is Sean Menard. I'm with MHM Engineering. I represent the North Star Development Company and also some of the surrounding property owners. The red color on that map I handed out is the actual application that was before you today. After we submitted the application, the landowners in green, the Rye family, came to me about annexing in. I reached out to John, and he had already noticed it to the city and the county and everybody. So we felt it was most prudent to just come to this meeting and ask if these other lands, the lands in the green and the blue, could be added to the application. And hopefully that could be added to this application and just be one annexation. The owners, the Rye family and the Warnocks, realized they'd have to pay for any extra cost to modify the map. The Basherides is the owner of the North Star. They're okay with it, long as it didn't hold them up. So all the parties were okay with this procedure. As for the ultimate use of this property, the intent is to follow the Bogue Stewart Master Plan zoning. Right now, we're not proposing any changes. That'll be the next step in the development process. So we're just planning on annexing it to the city per the zoning, the pre-annexation zoning that was established in the Bogue Stewart Master Plan. And you'll see an application at a later date once they come up with a development project.
Scott, I'll put you on if you want to talk, okay?
And so if you have any questions, we left the corner out
There's one
to
little
avoid
issue.
any of the
Okay.
keyhole issues or anything like that. So
Just hold on.
our goal today is to have the red lands annexed along with the green, which is the Rye family, And then the blue, which is down on Stewart Road, is Bill Warnock. I also represent him, and he's willing to be annexed into the city also. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. If none, thank you.
Thank you.
I can hear you, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just run it by LAFCO's policies and procedures and then the LAFCO Act. And in reviewing the policies, it appears that what you're asking is consistent. However, what's happened is we have that keyhole annexation area and there's a small separation there, so we're technically not creating an island. That's that little green notch you see at the top. And so there's a small area where that connects to the keyhole, which is up to the, I guess, to the north, east of that area is unincorporated. So I found it consistent because of some of the way the policies are written. In terms of the, that a reasonable effort has been made to include island lands in the annexation. Well, the city has tried this area twice, and it failed both times. It's been a reasonable effort by the city. There's no doubt there. The other thing is technically not creating an island, because the island already, if you want to call it an island, there's no clear definition of what an island is. So, but we're not creating an island because it's not surrounded. It's not an island. It's not totally surrounded or an enclave or whatever. So, anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you understood. Can you hear me? Oh, I just wanted to make it clear that after reviewing these policies, that I think what it gets down to is what are you comfortable with? And so I don't see that this is inconsistent with the LAFCO policies and the Cortese-Knox Act in the LAFCO rules. So anyway, that's my comment on that.
Okay.
Through the chair. Ms. Mendoza, would you mind stepping up, please? So with everything you've heard so far and talking about how Mr. Moody had discussed earlier that if this were to get annexed in, and I see your ranch right there, and being able to,
Oh, yep.
Piece of property.
Yep, thank you.
being able to exist with your parcel. Now, Ben, would she be allowed to continue on for as long as she's the owner of that, I'm assuming? That piece there? And you said she could also,
Until development change.
but she could also go back to the city and apply for zoning, special zoning around that yellow square there.
Just so I'm not yelling, so she would be a non-conforming use, and if development occurred around her, we would definitely take in consideration with that development, how she's getting access, how is that buffered with that existing use. And so there'd be work around there. If she remained an existing non-conforming residential use, the new development would have to work around her. And staff basically works through our standard review processes to make sure that that works. And there's public processes also that she could participate where there's notices that she would have an opportunity to express her opinions in that too if we're not doing it adequately. And then my understanding is that the pre-annexation zoning is locked for a couple of years, but there's always an option to rezone. It's just a matter of working through that, and then the proposed rezone is consistent with what that area is. You know, if that area has been planned and designated as light industrial, we'd want to make sure that what's proposed is somewhat a similar use. You know, or it's not a conflicting use, that where the staff would support it. But it definitely is always, it comes to the discretion of the city council, the planning commission and the city council.
I do want to make one amendment to that, is that the pre-zoning is not necessarily locked for 2 years. The council may change that pre-zoning if certain findings are made. So, but generally, what you said was true.
I just want to make sure you have all your questions answered here today. Seems like you're very nervous about what's possibly could happen here.
Well, I'm just nervous how it's going to impact my property value and the future use of my property. And I know that if you look to the left of that map, you see all of these beautiful estate homes being built and, other houses that have been there for a very long time. And they're not that far from my house. So I don't think they want to look out their window and see a parking lot or an office building where now they see an orchard, that's been there for a long time. But yeah, my main concern is, number one, I'm put on the application without my consent, really, because I would be an island if I wasn't part of the application, right? So my question was, can it be adjusted over time if it's found that those, closer to Walton Avenue would be better use for this low, medium density housing that they're proposing as well, rather than light industrial, and have the light industrial closer to Gil-Sizer Slough, closer to Highway 99 where there are no houses. So, but yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Which theoretically could be possible by going before the city council, which is what I wanted to clarify that as well, just to make sure that, like I said, if it were to get annexed, that now you'd go before the city council on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarity. Thank you.
Through the chair, one last question. So the salmon colored, maybe Doug, Mr. Moody can answer this question. Is that light industrial? The salmon color?
Michael, if you could flip that back to the other image. So if you looked at the TV screen there, if you look there, the color coded on the TV, the blue.
On a TV, oh.
The blue there, the lower left, is the light industrial area. And so the portion that's being considered, so if you flip back to the other, pretty much what we're looking at right now is everything west of Gil-Sizer Slough. And so that's the area. The salmon color is part of the landowner application. The green color are adjacent property owners that want to participate in the annexation. So Michael, if you flip back to the other one, so if you look on the west side of Gil-Sizer on the left side of the screen, where Miss Mendoza is in the lower left. But as you move north, there's a square there that has multifamily, right? I think it might be a medium density, and then you get up to the yellow where it's a low single family, low density, and then you get a park and a school to the north.
Yeah, my comment is I always think that property use ought to somehow affect what it's zoned as. If it's industrial, it's used for industrial. If it's residential, it's used as residential, and not have a hodgepodge. But I realize this is kind of the middle of an area that probably will be industrial or light industrial.
That's as it develops, it will need to comply with that zoning. But with development, and especially while you're taking in existing areas, that's one of the processes to try to work around those until it develops and changes use.
Thank you.
Okay, the meeting is now open to any additional public hearing. Hearing no further, the public hearing is closed. We need a motion for resolution 2022-0006, Ells Ranch annexation.
Through the chair, appreciate the fill-in information from everybody, and Supervisor Ziegenmeyer taking care of Ms. Mendoza's concerns. I think this is a logical expansion of the application. I think through LAFCO's history trying to square off things where possible makes a lot of sense for both the city and the county. It tends to eliminate some of the confusion that Ms. Estman talked about. I'd like to go ahead and make the motion to, on items A and C, to approve this annexation.
I'll second.
Regular moved and seconded that we approve Resolution 2022-0006. Roll call, please.
Commissioners Wooten,
Yes.
Ziegenmeyer. Yes. Baumgarten,
Yes.
Cochran,
Yes.
Juwan,
Yes.
Coniff,
Yes.
and Munger.
Yes.
The motion has passed. Okay, move down to number 7.
Through the chair.
The chair.
Mr. Menard had a question. He just wanted a clarification. My motion included the area represented by your map.
Okay, item number 7, public hearing regarding proposed 20-23, the budget. John?
Yes, I'll try to make the budget presentation simple. There, as a proposed budget, the only change that I have in the budget is the Cal LAFCO dues will be going up $118 this year, and the budget is more or less the same as last year's, or this year's current budget. So that's my presentation. You have the report in front of you, a budget report, and you have all the line items and justification report, and what we're doing. So there you have it. The LAFCO share for the cities and the districts would, in this proposed budget, be increased by $43 each.
Okay, need a motion to adopt the proposed LAFCO budget for 2022-23.
So moved, Conant.
Regular moved and seconded that the proposed budget be approved. Any discussion? Those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Opposed, no. Okay. We move down to number 8, public hearing concerning fire and EMS. Okay, Ms. Heather Esserman would like to speak.
Hi, I'm glad this was separate, because then I could talk about this as well. So, I don't know if, there's no report anywhere, is there, where's,
There's no report anywhere. Well, I'll let Beverly speak to that.
okay. I'm
she
used to
there?
them giving the report first, and then you get to talk, so this is kind of a little bit, I'm going to assume that this might be on the report. But anyway, so, like I said, across the street from me is county, and we were incorporated into the city. So we're under the jurisdiction of the sheriff's office, not the city police. Nothing against the sheriff, but I've had several problems in the past. We've even gone, I've made a complaint to code enforcement at the, I don't know, maybe May of last year about the people across the street, because they're not city, so it's not going through the city, it's going through the county. That hasn't gone very well so far. I've even talked to some Net 5 agents that have told me that the people across the street, evidently they came in there at one point. There was a registered sex offender that wasn't listed at that address, so they took him in. There have been some other illegal activity that's been back there. The building's still there. I think I even talked about this at one of the city council meetings, or the board of supervisor meetings. But I don't understand why I can't get Yuba City Police as a Yuba City resident, but the people in the Keyhole District on the east side of 99 have Yuba City Police. That's within their jurisdiction, I believe. There's a map. So I'm not quite understanding why, when I'm calling up I called up the police and they said, no, you're not in our jurisdiction. So then I had to go and call the sheriff's office. I had, and what's really odd is it's not really a bad area. It's just that I was outside. This is totally true. You can talk to the sheriff's office. I was outside sweeping my driveway and I heard somebody yelling. A man ran across my front yard and there's an echo, right? Okay, I'm not hearing it. That's true. So ran across my yard, dropped a ghost gun on my driveway, and kept running. But there was a hedge there. I didn't know if he just hid it behind the hedge or if he kept running. I couldn't see him. So I called 911 immediately. And then there was also that on the phone, the conversation of whose jurisdiction this is. This is ridiculous. Why do I have to? I don't understand. If I'm within city limits, the jurisdiction should be clear for everybody. And it shouldn't be where I'm calling them and I said, well, I think I'm in your jurisdiction. They said, no, I think you're there. And then you call the sheriff's office and they said, I don't know, are you on our jurisdiction? I had mail stolen. Then there was a whole thing back and forth. Neither one of them wanted to touch it because I don't live within the Yuba City jurisdiction and the sheriff's office wouldn't deal with it. Is there a way that we can get this fixed somehow? And I don't know if this is something that's specific to LAFCO, but it is definitely specific to the services that we get from fire and EMS. Fire, I love fire, it doesn't matter. Fire is okay. But well, there is an issue with fire as well, but that has something to do more with, you know, if you look at the grand jury report, and I don't know if you've all read the grand jury report, the last one that talks about there's just not enough money and the problems that they're having down south. That aside, that doesn't necessarily involve me. Can I please have Yuba City Police? Please. If there's any possibility of being able to make some of those changes in there, I don't know, I would like to have Yuba City Police. I don't like having to call these different people, and I would just really prefer that. I'm hoping that if the police get involved, that maybe I won't have the problems across the street. I'm a single woman. I don't want to have a registered sex offender that's not listed as at the address. They're not even supposed to live in that building in the back, but they do. And the county doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. Thank you.
Through the chair. You know, the one thing we could do as joint supervisors and city council members, we could reach out to, I'll reach out to Sheriff Barnes, and I'm sure you'll reach out to Chief Baker. And I get a few of these calls every year, wondering people kind of, you know, wondering whose jurisdiction are I in. I call, and I'm sure they could do some sort of reach out in those communities now that this is going through, and more or less help fix some of the confusion. But like I said, I'll reach out to our sheriff and we'll see what we can do. But that's fair enough.
Okay. Meeting is now open to additional public hearing on the service review. Okay. None? Okay. John, do you have anything to add to number 8?
Yes, I do. Beverly has a presentation. The first slide is up on the medical service review, and I'll put her on speaker. Okay, Beverly, are you there?
Yeah, I can't hear you that well, though.
Well, you're online with everyone here in the room.
I hear you. It's just I can't hear you very well. Okay, now I can see. Great. Okay, so my name is Beverly, and I've been working on the municipal service review as well as the sphere of influence update, which I'm presenting some findings for today. We have definitely had shifting sands with respect to policy options, and have also, we had an understanding that there was a time factor, a pressing time factor for adopting sphere of influence updates, and are now understanding it's not quite as pressing. So big picture, there is not a report released. The report will be released, I believe, in April in advance of the next meeting, unless the commission directs us differently. And we will be bringing the resolutions at that time in the agenda package for the next LAFCO meeting. Will be the resolutions that are being are drafted for the commission's consideration. So today we're just going to cover some of the findings, what these studies are to be helpful to the public who's in attendance there, and particularly the sphere of influence updates. Can you, next slide, please. Okay, so a municipal service review is a report, a study that's required to be done by the legislation governing LAFCO, and the point of it all is to prepare the commission for updating the spheres of influence of affected government agencies. Next slide. So in its the commission's requirement in the legislation is to reach written determinations on the topics shown on screen: growth, disadvantaged communities, capacity and adequacy of services, infrastructure needs, financial ability to provide services, shared facilities, accountability, and anything else the commission requires. The municipal service review also covers governance options, and you'll understand why as we get into the spheres of influence. Next slide, please. So the local agencies being reviewed are those providing fire services. The city of Yuba City. City of Live Oak actually contracts with the county for services, so that's why they're not listed here, although their contract is up for renegotiation this year. We have two independent special districts. By independent, that means they have independent governing bodies. So that's Meridian in blue, and Robbins, formerly, its formal name is Sutter Basin. Then we have four entities on the eastern side of the county. These are county service areas. Their governing body is the County Board of Supervisors. And there are four of those. We have East Nicholas, Pleasant Grove. The tan-colored one is generally called CSAF. And then we have CSAG, which is the Yuba City area. The unincorporated areas around Yuba City, which is a legacy of a previous special district that was serving those areas that became an anachronism as Yuba City grew and annexed. Next slide, please. Well, one of the topics is growth, and the biggest growth factor on the table, although there's been extraordinary growth, of course, in Yuba City, both in residential and commercial areas, most remarkably the commercial. We have plan development that's particularly relevant for thinking about fire spheres of influence, and that is Sutter Point, which is, we'll see it momentarily on a map. Let's keep moving. Next slide. One of the topics that your commission has not looked at, I believe, recently is disadvantaged unincorporated communities. So there's several requirements that have been amended into the law for both municipal service reviews and spheres of influence to look at disadvantaged unincorporated communities and consider them. Now, what you're seeing on screen right now, hopefully, is the median household income of each of these communities and these happen to be the places that for which there's available data from the Census Bureau. This is based on 5 years of survey data from a survey instrument called the American Community Survey. Basically, the trigger for being disadvantaged in the law is if the median household income is less than 80% of the California median, which says average, but it really is median. 75,235. So that trigger is just slightly over 60,000. So you can see in the graph on screen that there are substantial areas within Sutter County that would meet that criterion. Even Yuba City, even though it's not Yuba City and Live Oak City, they're incorporated, but they meet that income criterion. Meridian, and that's the Meridian census designated place is the high density portion of the Meridian Fire District. And we have the community of Robbins also meets the criterion. So you get a sense there. Next slide, please. Now, in this map, it's color-coded where green, the greener, the more higher the incomes. Yellow, the light yellow is most of that group would meet the income criterion. There are a few that don't. Pleasant Grove. This is the geographies here are census block groups. So they are quite large. This is just how the Census Bureau produces the data. This is the smallest geographic unit for which we have data. So you can see Pleasant Grove as a whole. That block group down there, it's just slightly above the 60,000, so it's just slightly above the criterion. Also, the block group where Meridian is, same thing, slightly above the 60,000. So otherwise, anything else you see in light yellow, orange, or red is below that criterion. So you can see the Robbins Fire District area is so affected, as well as a number of the areas in and around Yuba City and Live Oak. Next slide, please. And this is just zoomed in, so you can see those urban areas a little bit better. Unfortunately, the Census Bureau commingles data for incorporated and unincorporated areas in these block groups, particularly in a more rural and lower density county like Sutter. So there are, there are just limitations to the data, but you certainly see where incomes are higher and lower and where there's more and less advantage. The next slide, please. One of the required findings has to do with service adequacy and infrastructure needs. Particularly service adequacy and service levels is one of the areas of interest to this commission, and it's something that's covered in the municipal service review, particularly and most interestingly, perhaps for fire service relates to response times in terms of service levels, as well as staffing levels. Because ultimately with fire and EMS service, you're paying for readiness and the ability to respond to an incident if something were to occur. Next slide, please. So the whole point, and next slide, please, of the municipal service review is to prepare the commission to update the spheres of influence of these agencies. So the municipal service review is intended for that. Well, many people wonder, I'm sure the commissioners know, but many people wonder what is a sphere of influence. It can be confusing because it sounds like a boundary. It's not really a boundary. It's a plan for the boundary. In fact, and it is determined by LAFCO, the LAFCO Commission. It's essentially LAFCO's policy recommendation based on currently available information, what LAFCO thinks would be an optimal, most likely an optimal scenario for future boundaries. So, for example, if LAFCO were to designate a fire district with a 0 sphere of influence, that would be saying LAFCO believes it would be best if that area were to be covered by a different agency. So that's quite a policy recommendation. Now, and this sends a signal to all of the parties who are able to initiate reorganizations as to what the thinking of LAFCO at that time is. Now, it should be also known that the sphere of, just because LAFCO places an area in a sphere of influence does not bind LAFCO to that sphere of influence. When a reorganization proposal comes to LAFCO, it is always looked at in much greater depth during the reorganization phase than during the sphere of influence phase. The sphere of influence is just a policy recommendation. It's not actual boundaries, and it's can be fluid. Next slide, please. So why are we updating these? Well, the legislation does require LAFCO to take a peek at spheres of influence as needed every 5 years if LAFCO believes it's necessary. LAFCO has these purposes of logical development, coordinating agencies, and as we already mentioned, these are essentially LAFCO's policy recommendations. So LAFCO updates them every 5 years or more as need be, and LAFCO is not required to, but may assess the feasibility of reorganizing agencies. Again, the level of detail and comprehensiveness of the analysis at the sphere of influence phase is always going to be lighter than when an actual reorganization comes forward. Next slide, please. So LAFCO is required to make certain determinations in a written resolution when it updates the spheres of influence, and these are the topics: land use, need for services. Obviously, everybody needs EMS service, capacity and adequacy of those services, communities of interest, and disadvantaged unincorporated communities. LAFCO is not required, but may assess reorganizations or like consolidation or whatnot through the sphere determinations. Next slide. So, the agencies that are being looked at for sphere updates as the outcome of the municipal service review are these 6 special districts. So, the spheres of influence of the 2 cities are not being updated as a result of this because they provide many other services besides fire and EMS. We've already discussed these, so let's on the map, you can see in the lower right, you can see the dotted green area is to give you a sense of the Sutter Point specific plan area, which is the area where this proposed development is moving forward, and that's relevant as you think through the policy recommendations and spheres of influence. Next slide, please. So first up, we have Meridian. Meridian is an independent district. Meridian functions with a combination of paid and volunteer personnel. Certainly struggles to provide the same service levels that you would see in an urban area, but as you can see, manages to have a nice-looking fire station from the picture, and they do have a paid fire chief. There have been no proposals so far raised to change the boundaries of Meridian Fire District. None of the stakeholders has raised that. The current sphere of influence is coterminous with the boundary, meaning that LAFCO, when it set the sphere of influence, thought that these are the ultimate boundaries of the district. Now, we did receive a report from the grand jury that did raise a suggestion of consolidating all of the fire entities in the county. So certainly the topic did come up there. Of course, there are limitations, although the grand jury report is quite impressive in a number of ways. There are limitations as grand juries don't have access to municipal professionals. I didn't find a justification in the grand jury report for the proposal to consolidate all fire entities. And, when certainly the grand jury has an excellent point that there's underfunding. There is underfunding, certainly, among really almost all the providers in the county. And they'd certainly benefit from if the voters and constituents were interested in financing higher service levels, they could approve assessments that would help bring financing levels up to averages in the region, which on average you're talking fire services are in an area in the region $150 per capita. So figure that's for your average household size, that's $300-400 a year. Obviously, there's some funding flowing in from existing sources, each property tax, et cetera. Each of these entities has different funding sources. One problem with trying to dramatically consolidate all providers in the county would be discrepancies between their funding levels and staffing levels. And Meridian would be one that is more along the lines of volunteer district, and I think not really seeing a justification at this point to think about zero-sphering Meridian for consolidation. So next slide, please. Robbins. So Robbins is formerly Sutter Basin. Now, Robbins is a little bit of a different story. Robbins is certainly, as we already saw, a disadvantaged community. Robbins is all volunteer, although they did just hire a chief a few weeks ago. Robbins had lost its prior chief several years back and has had some challenges responding to service calls, and has had a number of has received coverage from the Yolo County side to cover for particularly auto accidents are the primary concern, although of course there are occasional fire and EMS, other EMS incidents there. So because the district has had challenges performing and functioning, they've certainly been on the watch list for whether or not they should continue to exist. Now, we do see they did just hire a chief, which they had made an effort for a while and put a solicitation out. They still need to staff up. They need to look at, in terms of beefing up their volunteer roster. They need to train volunteers so more of them can drive the trucks and respond to incidents. They need to look at their assessment so they can fund adequate service levels, and they need to look at contracting for service Monday through Friday, weekday hours when they can't muster a volunteer force. So there's a lot on their plate, but they have made it one very big step by hiring a chief. Obviously, Zero Sphere is an option for them. Who would be the recipient of their territory is a bit hazy. Another option for them is something called a provisional sphere. So LAFCO could affirm the existing coterminous sphere, but provisional with reporting to LAFCO, for example, perhaps on a 6-month basis, perhaps give them a 1-year trial period to resolve the volunteer staffing and assessment issues that they face. And those are some options that have been identified for Robbins. Now, one option that we have ruled out is difficult to see on this map, but if you, because Knight's Landing is adjacent to Robbins. Well, Knight's Landing Fire Station is nearby as well, and they are, cousins, essentially, who've collaborated in the past, and there's potential for that in the future. The problem is to actually have a consolidation between Knight's Landing and Robbins is very challenging because Knight's Landing is a county-dependent district in Yolo County, and Robbins is an independent district in Sutter County. Well, our understanding is that Yolo County would not be interested in taking it on, and their challenges, given the governing body is Yolo County Board of Supervisors. So it doesn't appear that a Knight's Landing Robbins consolidation is feasible. That doesn't mean that they couldn't be functionally consolidated. Like, for example, as Robbins continues to improve its performance and functionability, that may entice Knight's Landing to wish to engage in cooperative use of contract services, for example, for that Monday through Friday the weekday daylight hours when neither of these two districts is able to muster a volunteer response. And it would make it much more economical for these districts were they to collaborate. The sphere of influence would have challenges bringing these two together through spheres of influence. However, that's why we've identified the provisional sphere as an option whereby LAFCO can continue to encourage accountability of this district and perhaps functional consolidation and further steps as it looks at Knight's Landing and potential contract service providers. Next slide, please. We have CSAC in East Nicholas, and in this area there's been a long history of volunteer firefighting, and it's supported by property taxes. There aren't currently any assessments there. There are options for East Nicholas. I'm going to skip forward, though, as it'll become a little more clear. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have the Pleasant Grove CSAD adjacent to East Nicholas. Similar circumstances. Now, in the green dots on the map, you see the Sutter Point specific plan area. And this is where we get into some policy options. There's because assuming that the Sutter Point develops, and my understanding is that breaking of ground is anticipated in within the coming weeks. Sounds like it is. It will need urban service levels to serve its build-out population of, I think it was 30 some odd thousand units. So, plus non-residential. So clearly, volunteer-type service levels aren't really compatible with serving a dense urban area, particularly one that's intending to attract age-restricted communities that might have higher needs for EMS services, which are the primary services delivered by fire departments. So one of the options for CSAD is for its sphere to be shrunk down to the Sutter Point area. And the thinking behind that, if you show the next slide, I believe it has the county's proposal, yes. So here you can see, and they're actually, this is evolving. The county's proposal is to shrink CSAD and consolidate the remainder of the CSA territory. Now, an alternate proposal is to shrink CSAD and consolidate it in with CSAC. So both of those options are on the table, as I understand it, and I believe hopefully someone from the county may speak to that in the comments after the presentation. But this will help you understand the options for CSA, D, C, and F. There are a number of options, and they do relate to the Sutter Point issue. Next slide, please. So CSAF, similar. Would you want to put the East Nicholas and Pleasant Grove CSAs in there? There are some financial differences between the CSAs. For example, CSAF has a special tax as one of its funding sources, whereas the other two CSAs do not. Now, CSAF does not have an inflation mechanism in place for that special tax, so it has been eroded over time, and as we all are seeing at the gas pump, it's really getting eroded right now. But at any rate, they do have that in place, and so there are some financial issues related to consolidation of these districts, of these CSAs. But so you can see there's several scenarios there. Next slide, please. CSAG, this is the legacy area that was previously served by a independent fire district that the commission dissolved I think quite a while back, 20 years ago. Yuba City serves it by contract. Yuba City does not have any proposal to change the boundaries of CSAG, and nor does the county. So nothing has been put forward to date regarding any changes to the CSAG sphere of influence. Next slide, please. And that concludes the presentation of the policy issues out there. As we're going into hopefully the last stretch with this MSR, if your commission sees fit to weigh in on the policy options, additional options that you wish for us to consider, and content that you want to see in the MSR to support you in those sphere determinations, we would love to hear your input. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, you need a motion for Resolution 22-0008. Need a motion.
No. So we get the report.
Should.
Through the chair, yeah, I'll take a stab at a few. And maybe Beverly, you could address this, or John. It seems to me that as you look at boundaries, one of the services that these fire districts provide, including the city of Yuba City, is pre-hospital emergency medical care. Is that factored into this municipal services review at all? The current status of that delivery system and what's being forecast potentially for the future?
When you say emergency medical services, you're referring to response to EMS incidents?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what fire departments are doing these days is way beyond fire. And I'm just wondering if it is a requirement, as you're looking at spheres of influence and delivery systems, is emergency medical services a consideration or a necessity in that report, or is that a different service review?
It's included, and yes, I mean, it's, the vast majority of 911 calls that are dispatched to fire departments are for EMS incidents throughout the state and also in Sutter County. So yes, definitely. That's the primary, that and being prepared for fires and other emergencies are the purposes of these fire providers.
So there is consultation with our EMS provider in the county in regards to the services they're delivering in this report?
We do have at this point an abbreviated profile on that on your ambulance provider. I would say the content we have at the moment is pretty light. So if your interest is, if you want to tell us a little more about the topics of interest to you, we can be sure to cover it.
I don't know what the current status of pre-hospital emergency care percentages are, but at least it's my understanding there's 60 to 70% of what's going on outside of those fire stations. So it seems to me that, if you're looking at fire service delivery, it's I don't want to say it's competing with pre-hospital emergency medical care, but certainly those calls impact the ability for fire response or any other kind of vehicle accident or chemical emergency response. As you look at, and this is just for my own education, as you look at spheres of influence, is it, and I would guess, this isn't in my jurisdiction, but I'm assuming that there would be some financial information gathered in regards to the ability for these spheres of influence to provide the services. So let's just say Sutter Point, for instance. I know Mr. Carpenter's in the audience. What is the financing if you made it, that its own little sphere of influence? Is that evaluated in the municipal services review, or is that a separate study?
I've reviewed all the Sutter Point financial documents that have been prepared to date. There was an urban services plan, a fiscal impact analysis, and a capital financing plan that were adopted in 2020. The county just approved additional services by that financial consultant just 2 days ago. So there are more services that are going to continue to be provided as implementation occurs. But I'm happy to tell you about the bottom line if you'd like to know that now.
Sure.
Okay, I guess the briefest version would be essentially what the financial consultant found was that for Sutter Point, the property tax in that area is a generous enough allocation that it would, by build-out, cover the costs of operating 3 fire stations. So based on the assumptions the consultant made, which is, the number of housing units, the amount of industrial, retail, square footage that would be built, et cetera, based on all the assumptions there and all that being absorbed, the thoughts in the and their analysis was that initially there would be a temporary fire station. It would be manned by 2 personnel on a 24-hour basis. Once the development went into phase 2 of the second phase of the lakeside portion of the Sutter Point area, it would have a permanent fire station that's on a half-acre parcel. Then over time, as the whole, and that would be adequate to serve the lakeside portion of Sutter Point. As the entire specific plan builds out, there would be a need for 2 additional fire stations, and one of which would be on a 1-acre site would be the master station, and then another smaller station. All of those stations staffed by 24/7 by 3 sworn personnel, as well as the master station having additional personnel for battalion chief and support. So the cost, according to the financial consultant, in 2020 dollars was $6 million, ballpark $6 million annually would be the cost at build out to operate those stations in 2020 dollars. By comparison, the consultant estimated that the fire property tax generated would be on the order of $10 million. So by build out a surplus of $4 million in the fire coffers. Now, the consultant did acknowledge in the early stages there would not be adequate revenue. There would be a deficit in the early stages, and over time there would be a surplus. Is that responsive to your question?
Yeah, no, I wanted to make sure that there's some consideration about ability to actually serve. You answered the question about the phasing. I know in Yuba City's situation, 5 stations, 2020 or 2019, 2020 dollars, that was an $11 million cost. So I think perhaps $6 million might be a little light, especially in 2022 dollars, but I guess things can be adjusted.
Are you saying, Commissioner, for the operating costs or the capital costs?
I'm talking about the operating costs.
$11 million.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
well, I will look at that. I know the consultant made an assumption of the ballpark $150 per capita assumption in terms of necessary operating costs, and did look at their assumptions also included looking at the staffing levels per capita that were given by the county, but I will be glad to look deeper into it.
Yeah, just note that that's for a 5-station operation.
Okay.
Mr. Libby, you have some comment?
The capital costs for the fire stations are anticipated to be covered out of development impact fees and or community facilities district taxes.
Correct. I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug Libby, Principal Planner for Sutter County. There was a slide up earlier in the presentation that showed an existing and proposed. I just wanted to clarify that's a concept map. Sutter County has not submitted any proposal to Sutter LAFCO at this point to have a reorganization done of CSAs. So that was just a concept map that was provided for Sutter LAFCO for illustration purposes of that concept only. I did want to say that Lakeside will have a sheriff's and fire substation constructed as part of establishing phase 1. Our Board of Supervisors just approved a secondary contract with our consultant, Economic and Planning Systems. We're going to be developing the fee programs that will be necessary to implement Lakeside project, and that information will flow into the finance document that would then ultimately be brought to LAFCO for any action that we would request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just a couple of comments. So, you know, we've got down this problem and we didn't get here overnight. The fire services in the county rural areas are all run on special assessment districts, which were flat rated, flat fee based in the early 90s. And there's no escalator. So it doesn't take too much of a genius to figure out that your costs in the early 90s are not the same as they are in 2002. And that leads you into a cost squeeze. And it is a problem, and we have to come with a solution to this problem countywide. And I think we're working on that. I know we're working on it. It is a big problem, and we've got to come up with a solution for the benefit of the citizens of Sutter County. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
To the chair, perhaps establishing an ad hoc committee to review the considerations prior to approval would be appropriate.
Okay, can we have a motion to accept the resolution?
No, it's going to be passed.
They'll be in May.
Pardon?
They'll be in May. Next,
Oh, no, we're gonna postpone this till, re-agendize this till next month.
We'll continue the public hearing until next month.
Okay.
Through the chair, I think Vice Chair has a good option, perhaps a group of representatives to take a look at the report rather than getting the report a few days before the actual vote would be appropriate. I think I'd be happy to sit on that committee. I think obviously someone from the county needs to be there as well. Yes, you have. But just so that if there are any questions or clarifications, that we don't get a report given to us with an expectation of action without an opportunity to really.
So we will re-agendize this for the, let's see, this is March, for the May meeting.
It's going to be the hearing is going to be continued until the May 12th meeting.
Yes.
But I'm hearing that you want to form an ad hoc committee right now to review the administrative draft of the report.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm okay with that. It's up to you. Probably, I would say 3 members of the commission should be on that.
So you, and that's three of you.
So through the chair, would we have to make a
Mark?
motion and make up that ad hoc committee?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd make a motion to name these 3 individuals to that ad hoc committee.
Okay, regular moved and second that we have a ad hoc committee. And those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Done deal. Okay, item number 9 is authorizing the chair to sign letter of support for SB 938. Want to review that?
This is a proposal from Cal LAFCO to raise the threshold for our LAFCO-initiated protests on a LAFCO-initiated consolidation or dissolution from 10% to 25%. That was a problem that got into some legislation several years ago, which has made it almost impossible for LAFCO's initiated projects to actually go to a hearing and be approved.
Okay. So if there's no objection, I'll sign the letter. Okay, number 10 is the executive officer's report.
And that is fairly brief. The Gilsizer annexations hopefully will all be on the next agenda, May 12th. I even went to the point I wrote the resolution. So hopefully it'll get on the supervisor's agenda. I'm running it through Doug Libby and then to your county administrator to get this done, to have a zero tax exchange resolution, which would be appropriate in this case. So we've got 4 of them: Baines, Kells West, Kells East, Basrai, that's today's. Lincoln East is another one. And I'm hoping that we can get it all done in May. I don't like it being held up. We finally got the Newcomb Ranch Gilsizer annexation finalized. So it took all this time. And 700 forms are due April 1st. Please file with Paige or me, one or the other.
That it? Okay, commissioners, anybody have anything they want to say today?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up one item. So at our last LAFCO meeting, we had a matter brought up where we had some property that wanted to be annexed into the city. And I, for one, Commissioner, thought, well, nobody opposed the project because nobody here opposing it. And I don't think anybody really opposed it. There were some people that felt that they should have been notified that were adjacent properties that were not. And I realize that that's not a LAFCO requirement, but I think it's important that the public know what's going on, and I would like to make it added to our bylaws that we would notify any property that's going to be annexed into the city within at least a quarter mile of influence, or at least that's my initial thought, that we'd have to change our bylaws, correct?
Yeah, we have to do an update to the bylaws anyway, and that's a good idea that we put some sort of provision in there, but we'll have to fine tune it if it's just a city annexation, or is it a fire district annexation, or is it all annexations? So why don't I'll prepare something for you to review, and we can discuss it and determine if that's what you want to do or not, or some options at least.
I have a follow-up to Matt's. If a landowner wants to do an annexation, there is no noticing requirement if it's just the landowner's property, correct?
That's correct. If you have 100% landowner consent,
Right.
and it's in a sphere of influence of an agency, and it's what they call uninhabited, less than 12 registered voters, we're not required to do a notice and hearing.
Right. I agree with you, Matt. I think, more information is better than no
Right.
information. And that's where I think where this one got a little sideways was I think there was an owner-occupied annexation that ended up involving some others. And they claim they weren't notified.
Yeah, well, they weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't notified. And that's a problem because
it was a big
it's
problem.
important that people, I think transparency in government is critical, and I just think I did not realize that there was people that didn't even know it was happening, that should have known. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's it. So this meeting is now adjourned until our next meeting is at 2 p.m. on May 12th.